The spiritual practice of walking or of pilgrimage has long been a part of the Christian tradition. Usually done alongside others, pilgrims keep prayerful attention to everything they encounter on the way. Even though pilgrims often set out toward a particular destination, everything to the pilgrim can be a site of divine encounter. In poem number 29 of his book entitled Proverbs and Songs, the Spanish poet Antonio Machado addresses all those who walk as walkers. Famously, he writes, "Walker, your footsteps are the road, and nothing more. Walker, there is no road. The road is made by walking. By walking, you make the road, and by turning to look behind, you see the path you never again will step upon." Today in our gospel reading, we hear a story about two walkers, two people who leave the city of Jerusalem to walk 7 miles to the village of Emmaus. Interestingly, Luke shares details about how long the walk was, but never once explains why the two travelers left the city in the first place. Perhaps they were some of the first unintentional pilgrims. From the context of their conversation on the road, interpreters often presume that Cleopas and his unnamed companion became walkers because of what happened to them. A few days earlier, they had witnessed the murder of their friend, like too many people in our nation have in the last weeks. And with this friend, these two travelers lost their hope that things could ever be better or different. And certainly, some of us here today might know something about that too. And so perhaps these two became walkers because they needed to, because they needed to turn, to look behind them, to grieve that they were no longer on the journey they thought that they were on. As they were walking along together discussing all this, Luke tells us that they meet a stranger and end up opening themselves up to this stranger, sharing with him everything that had happened. Later, the stranger suggests that it is time for him to move on, but the two ask him to stay. "Stay with us," they say. They invite him to dinner. They offer him hospitality. And then, in one of Luke's most iconic reversals in the midst of the meal, this stranger guest assumes the role of the host. He takes the bread, he blesses it and breaks it and gives it to them. With these familiar acts, the walkers' eyes are opened, and they discover that the one who had been with them all along was Jesus. The journey had transformed the walkers into witnesses. I've always found the story of Emmaus Road both comforting and challenging. On the one hand, it reveals to us the comforting gospel truth that God's presence is always with us, even when we cannot perceive it. But knowing that God is on the journey with us even when we cannot perceive it is also what I find so challenging, so confounding, and so frustrating, really. It's the same truth revealed in the adage, "You can't know what you don't know before you do," as my friend Bobby Patterson likes to say to me. Such truths challenge me because they disclose human limitations. Try as I might and struggle as I do, I cannot always perceive God's presence or God's action in the world or how I can follow it because God's presence is a gift. One that is not conjured, but received along the way. Still, the story reveals that humans are not mere passive recipients of God's gifts, Paradoxically, the walkers in our story today recognize that the risen Christ is with them after offering hospitality to a stranger, after offering themselves to the unknown. And as much as they might have doubted the nature of God's faithfulness to them upon Jesus' death earlier on in the story, it seems that the processes and the practices of their faith tradition also prepared the ground for their encounter with the divine in the material reality of a stranger. The walking, the lamenting, the recollection of God's salvific acts in history and the work of hospitality did a work on them. It helped them prepare a table. Yesterday, about 20 of us took a hike together. We went walking together on the East Palacitas Trail just north of here, right alongside the Chattahoochee River. Ironically, my favorite moment of the hike came at the most challenging element. There was a steep incline that was made very muddy and very slippery by the early morning rains. The challenging element made me many friends, however. Almost instantly, I had more hands than I could hold. We paused for a moment, shuffling around, ensuring that everyone had a hand to hold before we descended on this very muddy and very slippery path that many of us ended up falling down on anyway. But as soon as we made it through the steepest part, as soon as we made that way together, I heard a shout from behind me. One of the pairs of walkers had abandoned their footsteps to the way, leading us now, I'm pretty sure with the winds of resurrection blowing through their hair, looking back only to shout loudly, "We're on a great adventure, aren't we?" And I thought to myself, why, yes. Yes, little one, little walker, we are, and we will make the road as we walk together with the God who is always walking beside us.